So in this session we'll look at how to test the market for your product prior to launching a business. And here you should be making use of your business model canvas and your opportunity screening checklist to discuss your idea in your groups whilst drawing in the key learning from this and previous sessions in order to complete your market screening test template. So marketing can be said to be the process of planning and executing the conception, pricing, promotion and distribution of ideas, goods or services in order to create exchanges that satisfy individual or organisational goals. This session is designed to build on previous learning whilst focusing more specifically on the early stages of developing the product and how we can convert an opportunity into a market-ready business. So by the end of this session you should be able to describe the key aspects of the process of testing the market for a product, idea or business. You should also be able to explain how to construct a market test exercise, and lastly you should be able to apply this approach to determine the market potential of your own business idea through practical exercises. And when investigating market potential we need to consider aspects of both marketing and sales. Clearly, marketing can be defined as the activities of a company associated with buying and selling a product or service, and it includes advertising, selling and delivering products to people. Sales, on the other hand, relates to transactions between two parties where the buyer receives goods which can be either tangible or intangible in nature. These definitions highlight the relationship between sales and marketing. And in basic terms, marketing can be seen simply as the process of communicating the product message with a view to translating this to tangible sales, while sales is concerned with the output of the marketing process, which is the actual transaction itself. So how does this fit within the model of entrepreneurship? Well, according to Shaper et al. 2013, there are 5 generally agreed conditions that are necessary in order for entrepreneurship to occur. First, we need an individual entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur is a cornerstone of the entire entrepreneurial process, and they perceive, pursue and exploit opportunity influenced by factors such as being focused on actively searching for opportunities, entrepreneurial alertness, prior knowledge and also social networks. Next, we need a market opportunity, and if the entrepreneur has the right qualities and mindset, they will deliberately search for an opportunity, and upon finding it, they'll start to shape it so that it has the potential to be a commercial success. We also need adequate resources for entrepreneurship to occur, and these are the basic building blocks needed to make it happen, and these resources can be financial, physical, human, technological, social or organisational in nature. We also need a business organisation, and entrepreneurship can take place in a diverse range of environments such as new independent startups, corporate ventures, franchises, joint ventures or business acquisitions, to name some. And lastly, we need a favourable environment where the critical factors of entrepreneurship come together. These factors are interlinked, and any change in one factor may have an impact on the others, and the reality is that these factors seldom align by themselves, and the basic role of the entrepreneur is to try to effect a match of these critical factors of entrepreneurship at the most optimum time. Success of the business venture ultimately depends on the ability of the entrepreneur to ensure balance by applying creativity, leadership, maintaining effective communications and aligning their product to the market. But why do we need to test the market before we launch a business? Well, essentially the purpose of market testing is to answer a number of key questions, and the first of these is, what is the actual objective of the business owner? Is it to open 1 store or 100 stores? Next, we need to explain where you'll get the funds from, and getting access to funds is an ongoing challenge for any business, and it's understandably easier for an established business to obtain financial support than a new startup with no track record. We also need to give some indication of the potential cash burn rate of the business, And businesses burn cash continuously, and it's important to have a basic handle on how fast this occurs in your own business. We also need to explain what our contingency plan is. In other words, if things don't work out in the way that we hoped, then what is our plan B? And we also need to identify the extent to which it's worth actually investing time and money in the idea. Once everything has been evaluated, is it actually worth the effort? Another important factor to highlight is the growth potential for the idea, and here you need to explain if you want to keep the business small or if you want to build a business of scale, and also you need to articulate that this is achievable. Now, it's important here to note that a key aim of market testing is to get the customer right, and often the end user and the customer are not the same party, i.e. the person who pays is not the person who uses the product. So before you test your product to the market, you must ensure that you identify both the customer and the end user, and that you understand both your customer's wants and your customer's needs. Now, Henry Ford is famously quoted as saying, "If I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have said, 'Give me a faster horse.'" And his Model T Ford, manufactured from 1908 onwards, produced more power than 20 horses. It travelled at speeds of up to 45 miles an hour and sold over 16.5 million units. And to this day, it's one of the top selling cars of all time. So the message from Henry Ford here is, don't give customers what they want, give them what they need. When trying to sell your product, you need to understand that what customers say they want and what they need are not necessarily the same thing. And you should also consider the idea that average suppliers give customers only what they ask for, whilst innovative suppliers anticipate customer needs. And you can do this by asking customers what they want in terms of particular features, and thinking about customer benefits and outcomes. You can then start to think about how your product or service can deliver them. And when approaching the market, it's important to consider whether it's best to adopt a market push or a market pull strategy. Whatever your product marketing activity is, it has the potential to polarize opinion in either a positive or negative way amongst your potential customer base. And the reality is that the product itself is relatively neutral, and it's our personal perception that influences the degree to which we're interested in making a specific purchase. And with this in mind, a new product or business has a greater chance of success if we adopt a pull approach rather than a push approach. And in real terms, this means that rather than simply broadcasting what we do to people who may be interested in our product, we instead create a product that's capable of satisfying the customer's needs and wants, and in doing so, we can potentially pull them towards our own offering. One way to motivate the customer to buy your product is to diagnose their individual pain and provide a solution which cures that pain. And examples of customer pain include not having enough time, things being too difficult, activities that are too boring or not engaging, or the customer not having enough cash to do what they want. From this, the cure to the customer pain could be to reduce time spent, reduce the level of difficulty or the level of boredom of a task or activity, and come up with something more fun, and you may have a commercial opportunity there. All of these cures can provide the basis for an offering which can lead to commercial success. In order to take advantage of the opportunity, it's important that we understand the difference between the features and the benefits which our product or service offers. Features are aspects of the product which do particular things, whilst benefits relate to the value which these features bring to the customer. So if we take the example of an ordinary kettle, a key feature of the kettle is the water level indicator, which means that the user can see at a glance whether the kettle needs to be refilled or not. The benefits of this include time saved, albeit a very small amount of time, but there's also a safety consideration in that the water level indicator reduces the risk that the user can boil the kettle dry if they fail to spot that the kettle is empty before they switch it on. The value of this feature is clear, and therefore this particular feature is now the norm on almost all modern kettles. So now we need to consider market strategies, and in order to survive and grow, the critical early stage of the business needs to be examined by the entrepreneur, who needs to adopt the most appropriate strategy in order to provide the best chance of success. The first strategy to consider here is increasing market share, and this is the simplest way to grow a business, and it's achieved by simply taking customers away from the existing competition. New businesses need to build market share very quickly. However, for a growing business, it's also equally important. Nearly 90% of successful growth businesses grow by selling more of their existing products and services to existing customers and others like them. So the message here is that most businesses grow organically simply by increasing market share. But we can also adopt a new product development strategy, and launching new products can provide potential or existing customers with a fresh offering that does not currently exist in the market, and this can be a powerful driver of business growth. Alternatively, we can improve existing products or services, and this can extend the overall lifespan of a core product, allowing the business to continue to grow sales when otherwise the product would likely have become obsolete, and which would have resulted in reduced sales for the business. We can also consider international expansion, and whilst exporting can be risky and can require significant investment, the potential gains of opening up new markets is obvious, particularly where the domestic sector is saturated and competition is high. Alternatively, we can look to external growth strategies which rely on establishing relationships with third parties. The first example of an external growth strategy is a strategic alliance, and this is an ongoing mutually beneficial relationship between two businesses in which they combine efforts for a specific purpose. If the strategic alliance takes place between competitors, it can often lead to a merger of the two companies further down the line. In this case, the two companies merge to form a new legal entity. Alternatively, we can consider licensing, and here a licensor may grant a license under intellectual property laws to authorise a use such as copying software or using a patented invention to a licensee. A license may have a number of restrictions such as a time period of use or the geographic territory covered by the license. And lastly, we have acquisitions, and many small businesses grow by buying over other businesses. These businesses may be doing the same type of work in the same sector, or maybe doing something different which brings a benefit to the core business of the purchaser, and in doing so opens up new revenue streams or brings cost savings. But in order to get to this point, we need to think about where we will obtain the funds we need to start the business and get things moving. And there are a number of internal and external funding options which may be available to the entrepreneur. So the first option is personal capital, and this is simply your own money. And whether it's come from savings, redundancy payment or inheritance, it is liquid, meaning you can draw on it without needing to go and get the permission of another party. Next, we have working capital, which is sometimes referred to as retained profits, and many businesses start trading early in the process and they use the surplus generated to reinvest back into the business. This is sometimes also referred to as bootstrapping, and it's very common in business startup. Next, we have family and friends, and this is a very common and easily accessed source of potential startup and capital. Family and friends generally have a completely different motivation for providing financial support, whereas a traditional lender such as a bank will be looking for a commercial return on their investment. The friend or family member is likely to be motivated by a desire to help out, although they may still want their investment repaid and may also be looking for some sort of financial reward. Another option though is debt finance. And this involves traditional loan funding, which includes the banks, but also relates to other bodies who lend money to businesses with an expectation of some form of commercial return. Then we have public finance, and this refers to grants which do not need to be repaid as long as all conditions are met. Grant pots tend to be extremely limited and are quickly exhausted by uptake. Grants should be neither expected or relied upon. And lastly, we have equity finance, and this can be public or private in nature, and this involves giving away a share of a stake in the business in order to attract investment. equity funding is generally viewed as being the least desirable option in that it means you are relinquishing a degree of control in your own business. And this type of finance is generally the preserve of larger businesses who are looking to raise significant sums of cash for whatever reason. So now let's look more closely at some of the key early stage issues that business owners are likely to encounter and how these can be addressed. So the first problem here is high startup costs, and the solution is to make do with less. The mistake new business owners often make is to borrow and spend more than is actually needed to set up and start the business. This can ultimately place a heavy financial burden on the business and impact significantly on cash flow. The next challenge is having too much stock, and the solution here is simply to sell more products. Poor inventory control can result in significant sums of cash being tied up in stock, which is slow to sell, and this is to be avoided. The next problem is bad payments, and the solution here is don't give credit. A business can encounter financial difficulties for a variety of reasons. However, poor credit control is a very common cause. The simplest solution therefore is simply not to offer credit terms to the customer. And then we have seasonality, and the answer to this problem is to put cash aside. Most businesses experience seasonal peaks and troughs which are specific to their sector or geographical location. And one way to offset the impact of seasonality is to build up reserves of cash to protect against reduced sales during slower periods. We also need to consider the cash burn rate of the business, and we can address this concern by reducing costs. And a business can make a profit, but if it runs out of cash, it's out of business. The business burns through cash continuously because of fixed costs, which are expenses incurred regardless of sales, and also variable costs, which are expenses linked directly to the sale, such as food for a catering company. A business which does not have the cash to meet its operating expenses is deemed to be insolvent, and sooner or later it will be forced to cease trading. Reducing costs can allow a business in difficulty to trade on until conditions improve, and this is a technique that's open to the entrepreneur. Not having enough cash can be a real concern in its own right for the business owner, and in order to address this, you should look at your margins. Cash is important as it's essential in order to run the business on a day-to-day basis, but if a business is trading but seems impossible to generate a surplus of cash, then the issue may be with the profit margin. Profit is simply the surplus generated by the operating activities of the business minus the cost of operation, and it's needed in order to generate a surplus to reinvest and develop the business over the longer term. And lastly, a common problem for the business owner is not having enough pay, and here you need to look at your cash reserves. When business owners are unable to pay themselves regularly, this is generally because the business lacks the financial reserves needed to take confidence in the business's ability to generate a regular surplus. And we also need to give some thought to growing the business over the longer term. And according to Shaper et al. 2013, there are 3 types of business growth that we could look at, namely financial, organisational and strategic. Financial growth relates to the development of the business as a commercial entity. It's concerned with increases in sales, the investment needed to achieve those sales, and the resulting profits. It's also concerned with increases in what the business owns, i.e. its assets. Organisational growth relates to changes that take place in the organisational structure, process and culture as it grows and develops. The structure of the organisation and the way that structure develops as the organisation grows is both a response to the circumstances in which the organisation finds itself and a reaction to business opportunities. And finally, we have strategic growth, which relates to the changes that take place in the way in which an organisation interacts with its environment as a coherent or a strategic whole. This represents business success in drawing resources from the environment to exploit a presence in the marketplace. Growth will influence the 2 basic sources of competitive advantage, cost and differentiation. But the entrepreneur also needs to consider the issue of sustainability, and the reality for any small business is that at some time it will encounter difficulty, and during the development of the business it will go through the stages of the business life cycle and encounter different challenges that require a range of different solutions. For example, the business will require completely different strategies when it comes to market penetration, business development, and retaining market share. As the business ultimately matures, operations and priorities will change, and the degree to which the entrepreneur can manage this will determine ultimately how sustainable the business actually is. So I hope that's provided some insight into the key questions you need to consider when developing your chosen business idea. And in summary, in order to complete your feasibility plan, you need to consider the learning from this and previous sessions and use this to complete the business model canvas template and the market screening test template, which together will make up your final feasibility plan.